Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you as ever from the beaches of the last free state in America, Florida, in the Messy Time Studios. I am honored and delighted to be joined today, cross country, by Javier Trujillo, who is an attorney in Los Angeles and a former combat controller. And I've come to know and call him a friend over the last few years. I've gotten involved. And Javier, thanks you so much for coming on the show. How you doing?
Oh, very good. Thank you for the invite, Chris. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and your fans.
Huge. We love them. Our massive core constituency of 8 like-minded men over 60. So, with that in mind, and hopefully they've all got a cocktail and are refreshed. Top of mind, what's the biggest thing on your plate these days?
The biggest thing on my plate right now are two really substantial cases that I have actually been fighting for the better part of 4 years. And with the pandemic getting involved, practicing law got to be a little bit difficult. And after the pandemic was over, all the courts were backlogged. Every department had a zillion cases in it. And then what the judges all wanted to do is clear their dockets of everything they could clear as quickly as possible, which meant you had to absolutely work day and night to get these cases ready and to trial. So that was a bit of a hassle getting that done. And these cases, I don't know if people know, people bitch about lawyers' fees.
No, people love paying them. What are you talking about?
Well, in the way a personal injury lawyer works, which is what I am.
Yep.
My clients don't pay me anything unless their case is won.
Right.
Or there's some payment made on their case.
Sure.
But in the interim, like the two cases, because of confidentiality agreements, I really can't do
Don't need to nope.
But in the one case, me laid out $103,000 in getting the case ready to the point where one of the defendants and my clients got to a point where we could actually discuss the settlement.
Sure.
And the other one ended up, you spent $85,000. So all this money's going out. Your clients are not paying interest on it. I'm betting that my clients have told me the truth.
Right.
And I'm betting that I'm skilled enough to be able to have taken those facts and determined the case is worth taking, number one, and number two, that it's the amount of money you're going to invest is going to be reasonably recouped on the other side to a point where your client is happy, because your client's the most important thing. Your client has to leave happy. Your client has to leave in a way that they feel that you've represented them in a way that's satisfactory to them. So
might I say, it is delightful to hear a lawyer say that about their client, as opposed to the common perception of who is actually the primary person to care about in this relationship.
Maybe big firms, like giant firms, can do that, but it's me and one other lawyer that works for me.
Right.
And
it'd be very hard to be a cold-hearted bastard and with two people staring at a client who's hurt.
Exactly. And the thing is, most of my clients are Spanish, are Spanish speakers. I don't have that many non-Spanish speakers. And you let one Spanish speaker leave your office happy, they're going to talk to 25 people.
Right.
And those 25 people have large families, as most Hispanic families are. Yep. And that's your advertising.
Sure.
If you advertise in a newspaper, you might as well throw your money away. It just does, it's not there. So, yeah, and I wasn't born in the United States. I came here from Ecuador in about 1955, and I watched my parents. I watched how my parents were treated by lawyers, and they were assholes. Total and complete assholes.
I am surprised. The Anglo judiciary system was unpleasant to Latinos in 1955. Get out of town.
Oh, really?
No way. You're telling stories. Anyway, I don't want to interrupt your mad fable.
Yeah, it was, interesting. When we came here, we wanted to be Americans. It was
unlike all the students on Ivy League campuses today, say, but we get it.
Yeah, no, my dad and I had wars. My dad was a very, very spoiled rich kid from Ecuador that lost all his money because he got in a fight with the vice president, a physical fight, and had to leave the country. At least
a lesson to our younger listeners: to not get into the fight with the vice president of your country. Just a thought, just putting it out there.
And especially sometimes the way this country looked like it's going, you don't want to be fighting with politicians physically.
No, because they won't actually see. At least I would hope, and I'm not projecting and stereotyping, but I'm hoping at least the vice president of Ecuador at that time actually took it upon himself to engage in actual fisticuffs, and he didn't delegate it to someone the way our politicians would do. They would have a second.
No, there was no double. No,
there was no double. This is real. Well, good for him. Sometimes, you need to smack a vice president. It's good for them. Anyway, go on.
It's funny. My dad was an interesting man. Wouldn't let us live around any Spanish people, and so that's kind of dumb. You looked at Trujillo in the phone book in Bergen County, New Jersey, when I was a kid. If it wasn't my first cousins or my family, there were no Trujillos.
Right.
Then fly out to California when I got married after the Air Force, and there was 25 pages of Trujillos. Who the hell are all these goddamn Trujillos?
Right. And for those of our younger listeners, a phone book was a printed piece of material that was about yay thick that you could beat someone to death with, so that was practical. And in it had everybody's name and address and phone number in it. You had to know the alphabet, tricky and not guaranteed anymore, and you had to be able to look up a phone number.
And we used to remember phone numbers.
Indeed. I'm going to be drooling into my gruel at 93, and I'm going to be rattling off phone numbers that I knew when I was 8.
That's very different now, Chris. Very, very different now. But yeah, it's just different.
But I interrupted. So you came to the States from Ecuador after your father got into a fight with the vice president. You settled not amongst fellow Spanish speakers, and take it from there. And then from there to the Air Force.
I went into the Air Force because I was angry. Angry young Ecuadorian boy. First, because my father got us kicked out of Ecuador, because it would have been a pretty cush life down there. And number two, there was a lot of prejudice.
Right.
When you're in the only Spanish person, even your interesting, they would call you like Puerto or Rican, which at that time you didn't really know it was prejudice. You're 10, 11, 12 years old. These are your friends.
Sure.
Everyone has a particular ethnic. There was a lot of Russians. There was a lot of Jewish people. There was a lot of Italians, and we picked on each other's ethnicity. But I thought it was kind of in a benign way, a kind of a friendly way, if it can be such a thing.
Sure.
So that it's different now. It's much more. I hate you now than it was back then.
And on the other side, the snowflakes were a lot more sensitive. They could grow a little bit of a thicker rind.
Yeah, that is true.
Two sides of that.
yeah. You got to be a little thicker skin than we are today. Anyway, I got out of high school. I was a pretty good athlete in high school. Was hung out with the jocks and all that stuff in high school. The football team was state champion, the BCSL back then in Bergen County. and just traveling around. And I was going from one college to another college with my friends. Remember co-ops where you'd have to work at a co-op for really reduced prices for food when you're in college?
Yep.
Well, they'd go take classes. I'd go work their hours in the co-ops, and I'd stay with them, my brains out at night, and just go party.
An education of a sorts.
There you go. And I was in Boston, and with a friend of mine who's no longer with us, Dwight, and I was sleeping on the couch in this old Victorian house that was being used by a bunch of college students that were going to Boston College. And I wake up one morning, and there's this lady measuring me, literally with a tape measure, measuring me. And it was after a fairly interesting night of carousing. And I asked her, we called her Morticia because she was actually studying to be a mortician. Absolutely gorgeous woman.
I don't need morticians measuring me in the morning. That just does not sound good.
So I said, Morticia, what are you doing? She goes, you're going to die. And I said, well, we're all going to die. She goes, no, you're going to die quickly because you just drink too much, you're partying too much, you got to stop. And believe it or not, that woman made me get up, take a shower, get up, and start walking down Comm Avenue in Boston in 1970. What was it? 72, I think it was, 73.
Right.
And I go down the street, and there's a little side street off of Comm Avenue, and it has Navy recruiter, Army recruiter, Air Force recruiter, all the recruiters. So I stop in.
They're not doing a brisk trade in 1972, I can imagine.
No, they were not. I went to a mall, and I thought definitely the Marines is not something I want to do. The Army is not something I want to do. So I deferred enlistment in the Air Force. Got to the Air Force. Total life-changing experience. I had hair down to my shoulders. I was not very disciplined, to say the least. I didn't.
No way. Boston in 1972 with long hair, not disciplined? No. I assume it would be highly regimented. Before AIDS, I'm thinking. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh. Yeah, you were. It was towards the end of Vietnam, and there were some illnesses being gotten from stuff there that was made you a little bit nervous about where you were belly bumping. I'm going to put it that way. Okay.
This is good news. A little bit of caution is valuable in a young man's life.
That's very true. So I get into the Air Force. Boot camp was a ride. I'd like to draft to come back, Chris. I really would.
Oh, I think 2 years of national service would do the nation a fucking hell of a lot of good. I think to start with every single Marxist marching and calling for death to Jews on Ivy League campuses, scoop that fucker right up and send him right to boot camp. Boys and girls alike. And I don't care if you're non-Trinity, where the fuck you are. Here you go.
Yeah, and
we'll have a lot of these problems.
It truly. I didn't hang out with black people. I didn't hang out with anybody from the country. I didn't hang out with anybody. I didn't know anybody that fit those categories. So they put you into a room. I think our flight was 22 people, as I recall. And there's black men, there's Jewish men, there's guys from the hills of Montana and from West Virginia and places I didn't know. You know, guys that were 18 years old and already had no teeth. You know, I sit there and say, holy shit, how the hell does this happen?
Where'd you lose those? Sure. Was that all fighting or was that just moonshine?
No, just bad dental hygiene.
Bad dental care. Yep.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
The degree of poverty I saw, Chris, when I enlisted was, and I was poor coming, you know, in the United States. And I looked at these guys and I thought, holy shit, what am I bitching about?
Exactly. I've got it. Can I go back to my poor? My poor is good. I always love that whenever I dealt with someone who's, I lived in Southern Africa for a long time. And anytime I had an American, the two guys I knew especially came from like really nasty areas of Chicago. And then they did like a year or two in Southern Africa and they came back like, this is great. Holy shit, this is good.
Perspective is a good thing.
Perspective is a wonderful thing. Exactly. Anyway, so there you are.
That's good.
In a flight of 22, diverse as all hell.
And that you get to know your other Americas. We don't know America. We know where we live. We know possibly where we grew up, but we don't know. I don't know the hills of West Virginia anymore, or anything like that. Although, still in combat control and going back to reunions.
Yep.
I'm getting in touch with them again, and that's I strongly recommend to anyone who's been in the military, go to your reunions.
Sure.
They are absolutely therapeutic. You're with the only people in the world that are going to understand whatever crap's running around in your brain.
Yep.
They have the same crap running around in their brains, and it's good to talk similar crap to each other. Sure. So it's good.
When you're in the Air Force, what drew you to combat control specifically? Were they just offering up a bunch of options of stuff to do? Like, how did you make that choice? Because most people don't even know about it. Part of what I love on the show is telling people about combat control, because it's the kind of the hidden service no one ever hears about. Because the SEALs and the Green Berets get all the Hollywood glory so far.
Yeah, Kenny said, was it Sergeant Sadler? I forgot what his name, Barry Sadler, the singing Green Beret. I mean, I think he did more to hurt Green Berets than he did to help Green Berets.
Sure. I was trying to thought about that. That's true.
Remember that guy?
John Wayne for a long time. And then it was funny because around about the mid 80s, because there was always a Green Beret from John Wayne on. If you needed a bad guy, a tough guy under the military, was a Green Beret. And then someone was like, they've had their day. And Steven Seagal's like, I'll play a SEAL. And then that worked for like 30 years.
Yeah.
Maybe it's combat controls time, but sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, it's okay. I come from a family of 8. Interrupting is a normal way of life.
Silence is deadly. Don't know how to cope with it. I feel like I'm failing, but go on.
Yeah, go sit in courtroom with me one day when the other side has, the podium, and you got to sit there and say nothing except I object, bullshit, nothing, stuff like that. Yeah. So I went direct duty as a mechanic from Langley, from San Antonio to Langley. When I got to Langley, this is another thing you don't know about. I go to a bar and I ask for a drink, and they look at me like I have 5 heads. He said, "You can't get a drink here." I said, "Excuse me, I'm in a friggin' bar, and you're telling me I can't get a drink?" This is in Hampton, Virginia, the town at the main gate of Langley. And they said, "No, you can't get a drink here." I said, "If I can't get a drink in a bar, where the hell do you go get a drink?"
Right.
And they said, "You got to go to a restaurant." And I said, "Why do I have to go to a restaurant?" Because the law back then in 74 when I finally enlisted, 50% of your gross profits had to be in food in order for you to get a hard liquor license.
Right.
Bars could only give you beer and wine.
Right.
And none of which I was really happy with, but it was better than being sober.
Right.
So
or social engineering from nitwit politicians.
So there was a bar right outside of Langley. Its name escapes me now, and I got a part-time job there because when you were an auto mechanic, the job was really 7:30 to 3:30, 4:30, and no vehicle needed to be immediately repaired. Go home. You come back the next morning. It's really just a regular civilian job.
Service.
A civilian job with neatly pressed uniform.
Right. Exactly. Just better creases in your pants. That's funny.
So I'm working at this bar, and these guys come in with, in those days, it was the blue beret. There was no flash. There was nothing. Just the jump wings. And I'm looking at these guys, and listening to them, and they were interesting. They were interesting. What they were talking about was interesting. And I got friendly with them. I started drinking with them over time. And finally, I want to say it was Master Sergeant Huddleston, I think, that said, you should become a combat controller. And I said, okay, what does that entail? What do I got to do? Well, first you got to cross train. You better get in better shape than you're in now, because I guarantee you the running and the exercise. Well, the exercise is not bad. The running, which I still hate, is a different animal. So it was those guys from Langley, and that got me into combat control. And the first thing, again, and those days it wasn't centralized schools like combat control has now.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that was exciting about going to North Carolina and seeing the air traffic control school that is so incredibly sophisticated compared to the blocks, little airplanes, I was flying around. They did have a little bit of radar back then, but no, this is super sophisticated what they have down there. The shooting range, unbelievably sophisticated. The range of weapons now, in terms of you're becoming more sophisticated and more expert with them, is much greater now than it was back in the 70s.
Were you guys still training on the M1 back then for longer range, or is it already switched over to the M16?
No, I had the Gal 5, which is the sawed-off M16, the extendable stock, but it was a great weapon. I liked it. It was much shorter than the M16. I believe the cyclic rate was 750 to 950 rounds per minute. You would actually melt your barrel if you could see that.
I'm always curious what the cutoff point is. My father was at Fort Bragg in '59, and I got myself a 1971 M1 Garand, and I took it out to the range. I was shooting it, and I videoed it and sent it to him, and he said just hearing the ding made his thumb hurt again. He's like, oh, why would you do that voluntarily?
That was an 8 or 9 pound weapon, right? Or
yeah,
10
heavy
pound
as
weapon?
hell. Heavy as hell. You could beat a polar bear to death with it. It's phenomenal. It's in beautiful shape. But it was funny because I sent it to him when he's like my entire thumb hurt again when I heard the ding.
No, the weapon that I want, the weapon I want, and I still want, was the M1 carbine. I love that weapon. I got to shoot it once, and it's an accurate weapon. It's a minimum recoil weapon, and it's nice. I really liked it. It's a lot longer than the Gal 5 was, but it's a nice weapon, and it's pretty durable. Mud, water, shit, that doesn't foul it up. Like the M16 when it first came out. It was not a very accurate weapon. I won't say accurate. It was an accurate weapon. It just wasn't a very sturdy weapon.
Especially they sent them off to Vietnam. It was like a death trap. The thing didn't work. It's horrifying. Anyway,
there's a bunch of that. But that's what got me in combat control. And the combat control is an interesting group of men. Again, I jokingly call it Boy Scouts with an attitude and a gun.
Fair enough. That's pretty solid.
You're talking about some of the smartest guys I've met in the military. Maybe our IQs are not up to what the astronauts and the pilots are, but these are some pretty smart sons of bitches that are out there.
And smart under extreme stress, which is a very different thing than just smart.
Oh, I'll tell you, when I was training in winter warfare at a Pope, we went up to, where was it? We went up to Vermont, and we were up at, was it Taos? I think it was Taos. And we were staying at a hotel called the Christmas Farm Inn. And
That
it
just
was,
screams military training right there.
yes, it's true.
Ignited
It was
by the
hard duty.
fire, ski bunnies. Tough, really
It was
tough.
real hard duty.
All you young men thinking about combat control, it's all like that. All of it.
But the guy and the woman that ran it were a stockbroker and his wife. He retired as a stockbroker, and he said, you know, dealing on the exchange is just too much of a bitch. I want something. And he had this wonderful thing. So I'm sitting at the bar and I'm having probably a rum and coke back then. And this vet sits down next to me, an animal vet sits down next to me, a doctor. And he's just kind of looking around, and I'm having nothing to do with the guys that are out there. You know, they're hooting, hollering, playing. There's a guitar player. They're trying to get his guitar from him. And some girls, because I went to college at my first year at Roger Williams College in Rhode Island, in Bristol. So I invited some people I knew. Some young ladies came out, and they were visiting. So that was it. And this man looks at me and goes, "God, those guys are assholes." And I said, "Really?" I said, "What makes them assholes?" "They're crude, they're unsophisticated." And I said, "It looks to me like they're just unwinding."
Right.
You know, do you know who they are? Because there's something in the Air Force. I said, "Okay." I think I heard they were called combat controllers. Do you know anything about them? And he goes, "No, not really." I said, "Well," I said, "they're pretty deadly." And he said, "So I wouldn't go up to him and say..."
Yeah, I wouldn't accuse them of being unsophisticated rubes. That'd be a bad way for your evening to end.
So when this guy and I spoke for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and then, and like we're talking now, we're just streams of conscious bullshit that comes out. And I said, "I'm a sergeant with them." And he goes, "What?" I said, "Yeah, those guys that you said are, kind of boisterous, asshole, rowdy. I'm one of them." I said, "Every one of those guys over there would probably die for you. They don't want to, but
not their first choice."
May not be their second choice either, but they're there to make sure that you can sit in this bar and drink and talk to me and tell me that my friends, my brothers, are kind of assholes." I said, "And you're right, they are. You want every one of those assholes on your side if the shit ever goes wrong."
All day long.
Yeah. So he was utterly, I'm trying to think of the word. His feet were taken out from under him.
A little chastised, perhaps.
Because he thought, because these guys are rowdy and making noise and unwinding and acting a little uncouth at times, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And so he thought they were stupid. And he and I were having reasonably intelligent conversation. And he said, "My God, I thought they were all stupid." I said, "They being who?" He goes, "The military."
Wow.
I said, "Some of the people in the military are so much smarter than you and I put together. Double our IQs, and those guys are smarter. And you know what? Some of them may just be the people that someone may send out to kill someone just like you that works for somebody else in another country."
Right.
And they'd be sitting at a bar just like this, like you and I are. You get up, and perhaps that would be the last drink you have. And I said, "So when you think the military is stupid, yeah, there's a lot of jackasses in the military, but there are some incredibly smart people in the military. And these guys here, the test that they have to take to be even accepted into combat control puts them in the upper 80%, and as I recall, upper 80% of the test scores you had, whatever it was, the public service test that they gave us back then.
Oh, yeah.
Which is not a very hard test, but you still had to be in the upper 80% of it. So that shook him. It shook him because he did not believe that reasonably intelligent people would do stuff like that. And I tried to explain to him that
It's crazy. It's that great old line from it's misattributed to, I think, Livy or something, but it's basically like, a nation that has priorities wrong will have its thinking done by cowards, and it's fighting done by idiots, or so, whatever. The idea that you'd have to be, an idiot to want to join the military. I find that absolutely fascinating. I've never understood that. I mean, it's I laugh because I deal with so many vets now. I happened to get out of college in '93, and I spoke to the Navy. I didn't speak to the Air Force, spoke to the Navy. Friend was going to the Marines, but he was ROTC, so he was off. But I mean, they loved my scores, they loved everything. And like I remember the recruiters like, dude, peace broke out. Like, it's over, we won. there's nothing to do. Right? Like, I guess you could. You sure if you want, but like it was like they were not recruiting, they were trimming down. Berlin Wall had fallen 2 years ago. Like, it was all over. History had ended. We had peace, baby. And it's so strange. Then it's just by chance of timing, right? And then there I am running from the towers on September 11th. So clearly peace had not broken out. But your experience at that time, it was fairly, was I imagine, fairly pivotal and typical too, from what I understand of the civilians' reaction to Vietnam and to vets at that time.
Well, I was walking in uniform down the Mercury Boulevard outside of Langley Air Force Base before I crossed. I'd get beer bottles thrown at me.
That's crazy.
And I'd have beer cans thrown at me from probably the fierce Facebook warriors that we read about all the time.
It must have taken enormous self-control not to pound these putzes into the ground.
You know what? The Air Force was very different back then. You could get away with that.
Oh, good. Back when we were real Americans, back before everyone had a camera phone.
My first sergeant in Langley, as a mechanic, was Sergeant Fahey, an ex-Marine, old school Marine, World War II, Korea, and he was towards the end of his enlistment, his time in. I think he had 27 years in, and he just didn't have time for bullshit. You talk about thin-skinned people. He just didn't give a fuck. If you come to him with a problem, it's a real problem. He'll deal with it. You come to him with some bullshit, get out of my life.
You got two problems, including Sergeant Pay.
Yeah, Joe School. So yeah, if I'd gotten in a fight there, there wouldn't have been any problem because Sergeant Fahey would have understood that.
Right.
I talked to combat.
So how long were you in? So combat control is a huge amount of hard work. The success rate, even application, is like still hovers around like 12 or 13% every year, right? For every class that comes through, it's not remotely guaranteed. If no one passes, they just won't. It's not on a bell curve; it's absolute. So they just won't pass anybody if no one scratches.
Compared to the guys on our board, I stopped in for a cup of coffee. I was there. I started my cross training in 1974, probably halfway through 74, and I left in 78. But I didn't become a phase 3, 5 level probably until 76, 70.
2 years real active.
Yeah, that's when they actually trust you to do something. You don't have to be babysat with
right.
the older guys.
Right.
Yeah, and again, you go to Fort Benning for static line training. You'd go to Fort Bragg for Halo. You go to Biloxi, Mississippi for air traffic control school. You go to Seattle for survival school. You'd go to Florida for underwater warfare school. You go back to Biloxi for advanced air traffic control. And so you were all over, and now it's much more centralized. We have 2 places, 3 places, and I was really impressed with the guys. When I went out to our first meeting out in Florida, and go to Herbert Field there, and I was impressed with the quality of the combat controllers that are there and the older guys that were there. And then in North Carolina, I saw some impressive human beings that are combat controllers. And as a former combat controller, I see nothing but good things from the ground troops, what the schools are putting out, the quality of the people they're bringing in. I see nothing but good things in those men.
Which is a great counterpoint to the general sense you get of the under 30s. You know, but there's something terrifying. Like right now, a military age young man between 18 and like 30, something like what, 14% could qualify physically to join one of the service branches now?
Yeah, it's again, they don't teach phys ed in schools
I know.
anymore.
Oh, well, you get me started on the leftist indoctrination of the Department of Education, which stripped out facts, logic, math, and physical education. So you get a bunch of Marxist pambies who are afraid to fight. I mean, they've done a great job. They've done a phenomenal job that we need to reverse. But we're seeing it in real terms because, you know, national service would be great. Oh, I'm sorry. You're a little overweight. We're going to fix that, sunshine. Put down the Xbox controller. Let me show you monkey bars.
I was part of a group of, I think it was 25 or 45 families that started a charter school here in the town that we live in, San Ynez. And it's now a school that's been around for, I think it's 24 years, 25 years.
That's awesome.
And I was on the board for 6 years. And I can tell you now that my wife still teaches at the school. The parents are a pain in the ass.
Horrible.
They don't understand. Number one, don't be scared of your goddamn kids. Your parents. Tell the little bastards to listen to you. You know.
Exactly.
And
you got that dynamic all backwards.
Yes.
Way backwards.
Oh, Chris, it's insane. If a teacher ever called my parents when I was a kid, the first thing out of my father would be, come here. In those days, they spanked you, and they did use belts. They did use the shit that now everybody would go to jail for. But you know what? As hard as my father hit me and whatever my father
we also didn't start losing wars until the 70s. Now, I don't know.
I just think
Spartans were not known for losing wars, and they weren't real helicopter parents. Just saying.
We can't. We cannot fight wars with a hand tied behind our back. If we're going to send U.S. service people to war, then we send them to war equipped to fight the war and equipped to kill everything in front of them.
Yeah. Never mind the fact that no one likes me saying this, but I read Churchill's Second World War 4 times for my sins and watching what's happening. It's coming here. Americans are about to experience war on the home front right here, and they don't get it yet. 800,000 military-age men poured across that border from countries on the terror watch list to a place where you could buy a gun easier than a car. So people are going to wake up fast, and it's going to be I hope not. I sincerely hope not. But
what I'm seeing, a total lack of discipline. I mean, I don't have a problem with individualism. I don't have a problem with that at all. But you're not living in you're not an isolated island.
Learn how to act normally in a civilized society. And that has been lost. I don't want to rush you. I do want to cover, though, you mentioned earlier your nephew, right? Who just got honor?
Ron Scher. He's a Green Beret, and he got the Congressional Medal of Honor.
That's awesome.
It's a great guy. This little son of a bitch never spoke. From the time he was born, he never spoke. His mother is pretty talkative, my sister, and my brother-in-law, just like his son, never talked.
He had no time. They were filling it up for him. He didn't need to get a word in.
Yeah, it was funny. You know, we went down to Ecuador a couple of times, and getting Ronnie to talk was literally he had to put a gun to his head and say, "Okay, what is your name, kid?" No. But yeah, when he get the Medal of Honor, you know, he invited the entire family. So I went out there, and I got to meet his team, the team, and it was a shock valley. It was a pretty hairy fight they were in, especially fighting up a hill, which is not normal. And there was a combat controller with them by the name of Zach Reimer. And I didn't get to speak in depth to all the Green Berets that were there, but I did spend a shitload of time with Ronnie. I did spend, I had, as a matter of fact, this shirt on, which has Combat Control logo on it. And one of the Green Berets looks at me and goes, "Where'd you get that shirt?" I said, "I got it the only way you can get it. I earned it. I earned it." And he goes, "You were a combat controller?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "When?" I said, "Long before you were born."
Long time ago.
Yeah.
For your mother and father met at that sock hop.
But the entire team's attitude changed.
Yeah.
It was like all of a sudden, oh yeah, he's like one of us, you know. He's not a Green Beret, but he's like one of us. So he talked, and each and every one of them that I spoke to, yeah, had nothing but praise for Zach Reimer.
That's great.
Okay. Zach Reimer kept everybody alive. The shit was going down, and they were vastly over outmanned, outgunned, and shooting up and fighting up instead of fighting down. And Zach Reimer did what combat controllers do. You know, the 911 call went in and said, "Okay, we'll take over now." And Zach kept everybody alive.
And for those people who don't understand what that means, the point of a combat control is you're an air traffic controller in the middle of the fight, and you're bringing in air power from above that the enemy doesn't even see, and placing it incredibly close, of necessity, to where your troops are, and that you've got to be very accurate with that under a lot of pressure, and that's one of the biggest skills that the combat controllers bring.
Well, you got to have your head in a place where you can see what's around you, so that you can get your direction and distance, so that you can get your ordnance on target. So when the ordnance was coming in, according to Ron and to a couple of the other Green Berets, they're huddling, and Zach is still directing until the last second.
Right.
Then he, of course, huddles up himself, and they got down. Now the guys, there was a bunch of Green Berets that were hurt very badly, and Ronnie's axe, Ron, I shouldn't call him Ronnie. The guy got the Medal of Honor. Ron's actions kept these guys alive. Nobody died.
That's
and
awesome.
Ron actually took a shot in the head, but it hit the Kevlar and just knocked him out for a while. When he woke up,
thank you, DuPont.
He wakes up and he looks at, I think it was a captain he was talking to, the Green Beret captain, and said, "How bad is it?" He goes, "Well, you're not bleeding at all." So
you're asking me questions, so I'm taking that as a positive sign, but I don't know.
That's true.
How do you feel?
So yeah, so they got down, and Ronnie was the first one to get the Silver Star upgraded to the Medal of Honor, and then every Green Beret eventually on that team got the Congressional Medal of Honor. Zach got a very outstanding award, the Air Force Cross. But explain to me how the guy that kept everybody alive, including his own ass, doesn't get the Congressional Medal of Honor when everyone that he kept alive and fought alongside was climbing up the same goddamn hill, fighting the same people. He doesn't get elevated to the Congressional Medal of Honor. Now, if there's any Air Force brass listening to this operation, I hope you are. what the
And there
fuck is
are,
wrong
so
with
you
you?
know who you are. We're going to be calling you later.
That's true. I mean, really.
Yeah.
And then Zach Reimer went on and after that and had a few more years and had more deployments. And this, if any combat controller, anybody, he can't take away what John Chapman did in any way, form, or fashion. But Zach Reimer deserves a Congressional Medal of Honor. And I don't know.
I'm always curious about that because it's having not served and having heard this both, how much is it always politicized in terms of granting medals? Because I hear vast diversity of opinion from people on that. Is that it's a fairly straightforward process, and some people are like, no, there's a billion things that go into it, and I have no sense of it. I really have no idea. I know the people that get the Medal of Honor usually fucking deserve it, but I'm not curious about the ins and outs of how people make that decision or how they come to it.
Chris, I'm not one qualified to do that because I've never been on a in the chain that would put the citation in,
Right.
put the person's actions in for citation and take it all the way up. Then it reaches the first level and says, okay, this is a Air Force Cross or a Silver Star. And then I don't know how you go back, 5 years later, 3 years later, and say, I want to review that. And I don't understand how that process works.
It sounds a little bit like the process for sainthood in the Catholic Church. Not in a bad way, but it sounds like there's documentation and evidence and cross-examination. People question. It's probably fascinating.
There's supposed to be investigations to make sure that the actions are accurate as they're written up. They're verifiable as written up, and they're above and beyond as written up. Now,
but I do know that everyone there was one, they had an event at the Intrepid, which is the museum in New York, the carrier, and it was a fascinating day. There were like 7 or 8 Medal of Honor recipients, all from I think Korea and maybe World War II. This is like 25 years ago. And it was fascinating because every single one of them said the exact same thing. Got no fucking idea why they gave it to me.
Yeah.
I did exactly what everyone around me did. I did my job. It was fascinating to hear them. And of course, and I don't think it was false modesty. They were really just genuinely like, we were all terrified. There's bombs flying around. Like, my friends died and I'm here and I got a medal. Oh.
I think it's politics plays a part in it. What is your relationship with the person who's supervising you at the time your actions take place? Do they like you? Do they dislike you?
And I'm sure they're all worthy of it. I'm not remotely implying they weren't. It's just from their point of view, it was just doing my job in a really bad situation, and I kept doing it, and I got lucky, and I'm glad I helped people. It was fascinating to hear them how they talked about it.
But like you say, for every person that gets a Congressional Medal of Honor, there's probably 5 or 6 more in that same battle that should at least have been considered for that same level of medal.
Yeah.
But again, too, sometimes politicians, when they want to show how much they love the military,
you bet.
Let's brush off.
Got a kid from my district. I heard that he was in a horrible engagement in Afghanistan. Could you go look into that? I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm sure. So I don't know what that process is, but
more importantly, because you got to run. More importantly, do you have any sort of quick say? Aside from the fact that all these lazy little putters should be 2 years of national service, is there anything that you would say to anyone with half a brain at 18 years old deciding what he or she should do right now? Do you have any thoughts about military, not military? Just,
I would say, if you're not from a family that's wealthy enough to not be concerned at the cost of college, the military is an incredible place to get your education. for a number of reasons. Number one, if they put you in college full time, at least when I was in, you get promoted to the rank of staff sergeant. You get housing allowance, you get food allowance, and you're getting paid to go to college. And on top of that, they're paying for your college. The military has slots at some of the most elite colleges in the world, particularly, in the United States. So if you're smart enough, they can get you into a Harvard, a Columbia, a Yale, a Duke, particularly if you're in the math and sciences. That's where the military is really.
If you can learn something useful instead of competitive victimhood.
But I would say I was a total and out of control asshole when I went into the military. I had fist fights with teachers. I was suspended from school time. I almost ran over a cop. Just lack of discipline.
Yeah.
And the military gave me. It's the first thing I was scared of. It's my parents taught me to fear nothing, and they got that wrath, where
right. Be careful what you ask for, you might get it, right? Like the dog that caught the car, now what?
Yeah. One of the first thoughts I had when I in the blue bus going into Lackland was the guards were there not to keep people out, but to keep us in. Because we found that this is
no fun. That guy yelled at me, maybe do push-ups in the heat. I don't like it here. I think I made a mistake.
I tried like hell, Chris, to get my kids, Javi, to go into the military, particularly the Air Force. I wanted him to see if he could go become a combat controller.
Yep.
My son-in-law, Kyle, big strapping guy, and when he was floundering around with my daughter, and I wasn't quite sure, whether I liked him or didn't like him, which I like him immensely now. I was thinking you need a few years under your belt to get a little more mature. And I even wanted my daughters to go into the military because the benefits that they get in terms of meeting different kinds of people, different levels of intelligence, different level social stratas.
And no choice in the matter, unlike civilian world where you can do that if you want to, but you can also opt out if you want to and live in a bubble.
Yeah, you can, but it's much harder.
But you can't do that in the military. That's the point. Is that you're here, you have to deal with these people. It's not an option.
And I actually think, besides just giving something, this is a great country. It's got things that are fucked up there. Don't get me wrong, but this is a great country.
Mainly those Ivy League schools you just mentioned, but we can deal with that later.
Yeah, it's a good place to raise your kid. There's problems here. I'm not saying it's a utopia, but
you know why there are problems here? Because there are people here.
Thank you. So
they were the people
with ours. I strongly recommend the military. I mean, I stayed away from combat control for 25 years after I got out. I have no particular reason. I just did. I wanted to separate and just get on with my life and then come back. Sure. And that was probably, in hindsight, probably a good separation, but I missed out all the years with these guys. I could have been spending more time with them. And you form bonds that never die.
Yep.
They just don't die.
I tell you, I've been honored. It was great. I was asked to join the board of the foundation. It was great, right? Because the foundation is looking to expand beyond just combat control vets. Like if you want to raise money and expand, kind of expand the awareness. I was honored when you guys asked me to join. It was fantastic, right? It's phenomenal. It's also, I've had some, even though it's not remotely like joining at all, but it was great to take my wife and the two of my kids came to Lackland, and we did an immersion day. And it was hilarious to see them put, the 100-pound ruck on my 14-year-old. He carried the jerry cans, right? And just to get a sense of, and then watching, nothing was better. My wife asked a couple of the trainees, the couple of airmen, could Hannah, my daughter, who weighs like 70 pounds soaking wet, and they're like, well, do you think she could carry it? And the look of terror on his face, he's like, no, ma'am. Like all that's going through his head, what's going to happen to him if this little girl gets hurt? I'm like, she's kidding. Don't know. She's kidding. But the sheer terror of wanting to say yes to this, civilian woman with this board member. And he's looking at my daughter like, I will die. I will die if she gets hurt. It was great. But they got to get a sense of that. It was great.
And my son is a stockbroker. He's a personal financial consultant at Schwab. And he said something to me about a year ago. He goes, a lot of my clients have a lot of money and they're getting older and they're trying to figure out, who to donate to. And I said, well, let me explain to you.
I got a cause for you.
That's right, exactly.
Exactly.
So
I got a QR code and everything.
So basically, I talked to Mike LaManna and Kyle about this, and Bert and Dre in North Carolina. I'm going to bring a bunch of these personal financial consultants down to an immersion day.
Yeah,
and really. They don't have a clue. I mean, these kids grew up in a bubble. They've never seen the inside of a military base. When they were young and I was wacko, they said that maybe we don't want to be like that, and just show them that this could actually be a service to your country too. Because the military does turn its back on its people. Once you retire, you get hurt, and you're kind of broken. It's like combat what? It's
just story as old as Rome. Just if anyone doubts that, go to any of the major museums of the world, and the painting depiction of the broke soldier veteran who's now fucked and he's living in his mud hut with 18 kids. I mean, that's centuries of art in Europe was about how badly armies treat their soldiers after their use.
And we haven't learned shit.
No.
It takes.
And if we had to account for the post-war costs, we'd never go to war.
Oh, exactly.
If you actually had to account for the entire thing, no, I'm good. Thank you. We don't really need to have that fight. We don't care that much.
Well, trying to avoid broken people after they serve, you can see how unimportant that is to the military. It takes them a minimum of 3 years to make a combat controller. How long do they work making us a civilian? Not a friggin' second.
It's hard, and we should do a topic for another time because we got to go. But it is critical. That's what work the foundation is for. It's why all veterans associations are critical, because what I try to explain to people. I mean, I haven't been in, but I was in war zones and I was seeing the misery. Right? That even the most gung ho 18 to 20-year-old going in does not know what he's signing up for.
No.
You just don't. And when they get there, what I found fascinating is not just here, Israel, lots of other, for all the money that's poured in, psychological testing, all the rest of it, there's still no predictability. You can take 50 guys who are all kind of the same, and they go through the same horrible things and see the same horrible things. 40 of them will be like, and go back to civilian life. And a few will have problems. A few will really have problems. What I found absolutely fascinating, all the money poured in, is there's no predictability going in as to who is going to be. They used to call it shell shock. Now they call it PTS, but which I refuse to call PTSD because it's not a syndrome. It's not a disorder. Anyone that goes through that is going to be affected. How we help those people afterwards is incredibly important as Americans because they put it all on the line, and some of them didn't come back.
And I would say the average person looks at an ex-soldier, male or female, and has all four limbs and can speak coherently, is not in a wheelchair or some supportive device. They say, that person's all right.
That's all right. Yeah.
There isn't a person who's been in combat or in stressful situations like the military, because there's no stressful situation like a military stressful situation where your shit can be pulverized like right now.
Right now.
And the psychological effects of concussive injuries, which never show on the outside, the psychological effect of fear, that's insane. I can remember being scared shitless and just think, control.
That persistent grinding fear. A buddy of mine I do a lot of work with, retired Green Beret, hard ass, right? Hard ass, very effective at what he does in the private sector. Got PTS, like he can't go to fireworks displays.
Yeah.
So like July 4th is a real problem for him, right? And it's not a matter of counseling and the rest of he's had all that. That's just ingrained. And it's a testament to how disciplined he is. You know, he's just one example of many, right? Of pulling that together. And as you say, the outside world, he looks just like everyone else, just like anyone who's been through that. But we have to take off for now. But thank you. You're coming back. We're going to discuss other things. But what would you leave our guests with? Those increasing numbers of young people who are actually listening to the show now that my daughter's gone to college. But they should sign up.
Would I sign up? I think I would, because I would not be the lawyer I am today but for combat control, literally.
That's awesome.
And it was the discipline that CCT gave me. It was, and the military in general.
Yeah.
My parents, of course, had a shitload to do with it too. But in terms of the grown-up guy, I think that the military had a shitload to do with it, and positive.
That's awesome.
And I say, enlist, goddammit.
And they'll let you shoot lots of guns.
They got some incredible weapons now that they didn't have. The black gun days when I was in it are over.
All over.
Black powder.
That's awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Today, and to everyone else out there, I'll close as I usually do. That I implore you to turn off the mainstream media who are lying to you and tune into Messy Times.
There you go. And one other thing, I'm very liberal. And,
that's okay. We take all kinds here. We don't discriminate.
And liberals and people much more conservative can still have rational conversations, can still be friends, and don't have to kill each other.
That's the most radical thing you've said so far. I don't know if that works in today's America.
Later, my friend.
Yeah.